Have you ever noticed how someone can go from choosing you effortlessly to suddenly not? No fight, no dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet shift that leaves you replaying every text like it's the Zapruder film. And the most unsettling part isn't that they stopped choosing you, it's that they did it silently, without explanation, while still being polite, friendly, even warm. Which makes you wonder, what did I do wrong without realizing it? Because if you knew what you did, at least you'd have something to fix. But what if the real reason has nothing to do with a single mistake and everything to do with a slow, invisible change you didn't even notice happening? Let me tell you a story. I once coached someone who said, "We never argued, we had chemistry, they said they liked me, and then one day I just wasn't the one anymore." And that confusion is where the real emotional pain lives, not in rejection, but in mystery. Our brains hate unanswered questions. We'd rather hear a brutal truth than be left guessing. So today, I want to pull back the curtain on the silent reason people stop choosing someone they once wanted. And I'll warn you, once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. In the beginning, everything feels easy. You're chosen without effort. Your presence feels valued. There's a natural rhythm. You're not auditioning. You're not proving. You're just being. And that's the key, being. Because at some point, without realizing it, many people stop being and start managing. Managing the connection, managing how they're perceived, managing the outcome. And the moment a relationship turns into a strategy game, something subtle but powerful shifts. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people miss. Attraction doesn't disappear because you cared too much. It disappears because the energy of the connection changed. Think of it like this. When someone first chooses you, they're responding to how they feel around you. Light, curious, energized. But slowly, as expectations creep in, as unspoken pressure builds, as you begin to emotionally lean instead of stand, that feeling changes. Not enough to cause a dramatic exit, just enough to make them hesitate, and hesitation is deadly to desire. Now, before your brain jumps to panic mode, so I should care less, be cold, pretend I don't want them, relax. That's not only wrong, it's exhausting. And let's be honest, no one wants to play emotional chess at 2 a.m. What actually happens is far more human and far more fixable. There's a moment, often unnoticed, where the dynamic quietly flips, where they stop choosing you and start allowing you. And that moment doesn't come with an announcement. It comes with subtle shifts you probably explained away as normal. Shorter responses, less initiative, you suggesting plans more than they do, nothing alarming on its own. But together, they tell a story. And the real reason behind that story is something almost no one talks about. But once you understand it, you'll see exactly where the power slipped and how to take it back without saying a word. What most people don't realize is that being chosen isn't about effort. It's about contrast. Desire lives in polarity. It needs two people standing firmly in themselves, not one person slowly orbiting the other. And here's where things quietly unravel. When you begin to emotionally over-accommodate, you flatten that contrast. You don't lose value because you became too available. You lose tension because you stop being anchored in your own center. Imagine this like a movie scene. At first, two characters walk side by side, same pace, same direction. Then one starts adjusting their stride to match the other, slowing down, speeding up, turning when the other turns. It looks caring, it feels considerate. But after a while, the second character isn't walking with someone anymore. They're being followed. And no one falls in love with someone who's following them, even if that person is kind, attractive, and well-intentioned. This is the silent shift people feel but can't name. The other person doesn't wake up one morning and think, "I don't choose you anymore." They wake up feeling slightly less pulled toward you, slightly less curious, slightly less challenged. And because there's no obvious problem, they don't confront it, they just drift. And drifting hurts more than leaving because it makes you chase clarity instead of connection. Here's where fear sneaks in. When you sense that pullback, your instinct is to close the gap. You give more reassurance. You become more agreeable. You ask indirect questions like, "Are we okay?" Which, let's be honest, has never made anyone feel more attracted in the history of humanity. It's like leaning closer to someone who's already stepping back. The intention is love, the impact is pressure, and pressure doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers, it shows up as obligation, as expectation, as the feeling that choosing you now comes with a responsibility instead of a reward. That's when someone starts choosing space, not because they don't like you, but because space feels lighter. Now, let me interrupt this emotional spiral for just a second. If your brain is saying, great, so I ruined everything, congratulations, you're human. But also, stop. Because if this were irreversible, you'd see people never reconnect, never rekindle, never be rechosen. And yet it happens all the time, which tells us something important. What changed once can change again. The turning point is understanding that attraction isn't maintained by trying to be chosen. It's maintained by choosing yourself consistently. The moment you subtly abandoned your own rhythm, your own standards, your own sense of fullness, the dynamic tilted, not dramatically, quietly, and the other person felt it before you ever did. Here's the part that's hard to hear but liberating once you accept it. You don't get rechosen by explaining your value. You get rechosen by re-embodying it, by returning to the version of you who wasn't waiting to be picked, but was already standing in a life that felt complete. That energy doesn't chase, it invites. And the next piece, the one that changes everything, has nothing to do with pulling away or playing games. It's about a subtle internal shift that instantly alters how someone feels around you, often before you even say a word. That internal shift begins the moment you stop monitoring how you're being received and start inhabiting how you actually feel. When you're constantly scanning for signals, did they reply fast enough? Did that joke land? Am I about to lose them? Your attention leaves your body and moves into surveillance mode. And here's the irony, the more you watch someone, the less they feel you. Presence disappears when self-consciousness takes over. Think about the people you've been most drawn to in your life. Not the ones who tried hardest, but the ones who seemed grounded. The ones who weren't rushing the moment. They weren't withholding, but they weren't hovering either. Being around them felt like breathing normally again. That feeling, that's emotional. Safety mixed with intrigue. And it only comes from someone who is comfortable not being chosen in every single moment. Now, here's where excitement comes back into the picture. When you reclaim your internal steadiness, something fascinating happens. The other person feels a subtle recalibration. They can't articulate it, but they sense that you're no longer leaning. And when you stop leaning, they become aware of the space between you again. Space isn't distance, it's possibility. It's the room where desire stretches its legs and remembers why it showed up in the first place. This doesn't mean you become distant or detached. It means you stop outsourcing your emotional balance to their behavior. You enjoy their presence, but you don't collapse without it. You welcome connection, but you don't negotiate your worth for consistency. And here's a slightly humorous but painfully accurate test. If they cancel plans and your entire mood for the evening implodes, that's not chemistry. That's dependence wearing a trench coat pretending to be romance. When you begin to hold yourself with that quiet confidence again, the dynamic starts to breathe. Conversations feel lighter. You're not trying to steer them toward reassurance. You're responding, not performing. And paradoxically, that's when people feel drawn back in. Not because you did something to them, but because you stopped doing something to yourself. There's urgency here because most people wait too long. They wait until they're already half unchosen before they change. And by then, they're trying to revive desire with explanations, emotional appeals, or one last honest conversation. Those conversations rarely fail because honesty is bad. They fail because attraction doesn't grow from persuasion. It grows from experience. And the experience of you has to shift before their feelings can. Here's the fear that often surface. At this stage, what if I step back into myself and they don't come back? And that's the question that separates growth from grasping. Because if someone only stays when you abandon yourself, staying was never the prize. Reclaiming your center isn't a tactic. It's a filter. It reveals who can meet you in a healthy dynamic and who was only comfortable when you were smaller. But there's one more layer to this. A deeper reason people stop choosing someone that has nothing to do with availability, boundaries, or confidence alone. It has to do with how predictable the emotional outcome with you became and how to disrupt that without becoming someone you're not. And that's where everything shifts from loss to power. Predictability is comforting in routines, but it's quietly lethal to desire. When someone can emotionally forecast every interaction with you, how you'll react, what you'll say, how available you'll be, the connection stops feeling alive. Not bad, not wrong, just finished. And this is the part that stings because most people confuse being emotionally consistent with being emotionally flat. They think, I'm just being stable. I'm being kind. I'm being reliable. All good things. But attraction needs more than goodness. It needs movement. Let me explain this without turning it into a psychology lecture you didn't sign up for. When someone first chooses you, there's a sense of discovery. They don't fully know you yet. There's curiosity, unpredictability, a feeling that time with you could go in different directions, but slowly, if you begin organizing your emotional world around them, the mystery evaporates. They know you'll be there. They know you'll understand. They know you'll wait. And certainty, when it's unearned, removes urgency. This is where people panic and do the wrong thing. They think unpredictability means drama, hot and cold behavior, disappearing, playing games. Let's be clear, nothing kills attraction faster than someone acting out of fear while calling it confidence. True emotional intrigue doesn't come from inconsistency. It comes from depth, from a life that continues to expand whether someone is watching or not. Ask yourself something honestly and don't answer out loud unless you want to confuse people around you. When was the last time you surprised yourself? Not them, you. When was the last time you chose something because it lit you up, not because it protected the connection? That's the version of you people stop choosing when you disappear into accommodation. When you begin reintroducing growth into your life, new challenges, new rhythms, new sources of meaning, you change the emotional experience of being around you. You're no longer a static presence. You're a moving one. And movement creates pull, not anxiety. Pull, the kind that makes someone lean in again without knowing why. Here's the subtle power shift. You stop needing them to validate your momentum. You share your life instead of presenting it for approval. You're not trying to impress, you're expressing. And expression is magnetic because T signals self-trust. People are drawn to those who trust themselves, not because they're perfect, but because they re-alive. There's also a quiet confidence that returns when you stop chasing certainty. You don't rush conversations toward labels. You don't fish for reassurance. You let moments be incomplete. And incompleteness is where desire lingers. It's what makes someone think about you later instead of feeling like they already have you fully figured out. And here's the twist most people don't expect sometimes. When you reclaim this version of yourself, the person who stopped choosing you notices and steps forward again. Other times they don't. But either way, you win back something far more important than their attention. You win back your alignment. Because the final truth is this, being chosen is never about convincing someone to see your value. It's about refusing to abandon it for connection. And once you understand that, the silence that once felt like rejection starts to feel like information. And what you do with that information, how you respond to silence instead of chasing noise, is what ultimately decides who chooses you next. Silence is uncomfortable because it removes feedback. It forces you to sit with yourself instead of reacting to someone else. And that's exactly why most people rush to fill it. With texts, explanations, emotional bids, or closure conversations that are really just disguised pleas. But silence isn't the enemy. Misinterpreting it is, when someone stops choosing you quietly, they're giving you data. Not a verdict on your worth, but a snapshot of the dynamic as it currently exists. And the most powerful response to that data is not urgency, it's calibration. The moment you treat silence as an emergency, you position yourself as the one who needs saving. The moment you treat it as information, you step back into authorship of your own experience. Here's where excitement returns. Not the anxious kind, but the grounded kind. You begin asking different questions. Not how do I get them back? But is this dynamic actually aligned with the version of me I respect? That shift alone changes how you show up. You're no longer trying to be chosen from a place of fear. You're evaluating from a place of self-trust. And paradoxically, that's when people feel you again. There's urgency here because every time you abandon your center to chase clarity, you reinforce the very pattern that made you less compelling in the first place. You teach the connection that you'll shrink to preserve it. And no one feels inspired choosing someone who disappears inside the relationship. The goal was never to be needed, it was to be wanted. Now, let's add a moment of honesty with a dash of humor. If someone has to be convinced, reminded, or emotionally escorted into choosing you, congratulations, you've just signed up for a full-time job with no benefits. Desire that has to be managed will always feel fragile. Desire that is earned through presence and polarity feels effortless. When you stop trying to resurrect the past version of the connection and start embodying the next version of yourself, something shifts. You become less predictable emotionally, not because you're inconsistent, but because you're no longer organized around one outcome. You're responsive, not reactive, interested, not invested at any cost. And that changes the emotional weather around you. Some people will feel that shift and step closer. Others will quietly step away. Both outcomes are clarifying because the ones who can meet you when you're standing in your fullness are the only ones who could ever truly choose you anyway. And here's the final piece most people miss. Being chosen is not a moment. It's a pattern. It's not the text they send to day or the plan they make this weekend. It's how consistently someone leans in when you're not chasing, explaining, or shrinking. When you stop trying to force the pattern, you finally get to see it clearly. So if someone stopped choosing you in silence, let that silence do its job. Let it show you where you overextended, where you abandoned your rhythm, where you confused closeness with collapse. Then do the one thing that actually changes everything. Come back to yourself fully. Because the most attractive version of you was never the one asking to be chosen. It was the one who remembered they already were.